and fourth sector work as well. So cloud and cloud adoption in the regulated environment, always some challenging fun. So let's make a start. If I can, oh, come on. Right. So what are we going to be looking at today? So I want to help everybody to understand, well, what do we actually mean by cloud? What features and things do we need to have in place? What capabilities do we need from an organizational standpoint that will enable us to adopt cloud safely? What are the regulatory challenges, and how difficult, based on the information types, is it to secure the cloud? And then some things to consider when you're actually evaluating cloud providers. And of course, as always, we will have some final thoughts from me as well. I find it helps to equate the cloud to something that people that everybody understands. If you consider when you buy a car or when you own a car, all the things that you have to do. So if you own your own garage and you own your own car, it's the equivalent of a fully owned data center with everything inside it being yours. So as a consumer, you are accountable for all of the support costs, in this case, driver, tolls, fuel, charges, all of the hosting costs, road tax, insurance, consumables, servicing, etc. And then in the hardware, the infrastructure, you've got depreciation, you've got the car, you've got the garaging as well. In the next part, well, actually, you don't own your own garage, you rent the garage. That's private hosting or private cloud. Why would I own a data center? I can actually put it in the private cloud. So in this case, I still own and I'm still accountable for all of the costs and all of the things that are to do with the car. So, tolls, fuel, parking charges, road tax, etc., etc. But as we move away from ownership, if I lease the car, the driver tolls, fuel, parking charges. I'm still accountable for the road tax. I'm still accountable for the insurance. I still have to replace wipers, tires, and everything else. So you can see that the actual burden on me as a consumer is moving further and further away. If I hire a car, well, that's even better because I don't have to worry about road tax or insurance. That's provided to me by the hire company. If I look at servicing, depreciation, again, nothing I have to worry about. When I'm driving the car, I do have parking charges, I do have fuel, I do have tolls, I do have, and I have to be the driver. Finally, let's move into software as a service. Well, as a software as a service, it's like being in a taxi. I don't get much choice. I can't stipulate what car I'm going to get or what the CC is or anything about that, but it will get me from A to B. And it'll get me there in relative comfort, depending on what I'm going to pay. So I don't actually have to pay for I'm not accountable for anything, including driving the car. What that equates to is our traditional security approach on the left-hand side, where everything is owned by your organization and controlled by your organization. That's your sort of moat and castle type of security approach. At the other end, you've got to move further and further away into actually focus on data-centric security and actually look at how do we secure the data wherever it is and move away from having to worry about actually this data is in a secure box. It doesn't matter where it is as long as the data itself is secure. So let's look at the cloud hosting and hosting options. You'll see in the bottom left-hand corner where the responsibilities are. With cloud, you often get a split responsibility model. So again, a fully owned data center, we are responsible for everything. We are responsible for the business users, the privileged user access, application maintenance, application support, licenses, operating system, hardware, air conditioning, physical security, and actually maintaining the land in the building. If we outsource data centers, which a lot of people do, we don't worry about the land in the building or air conditioning or the physical security. That's part of the contract. But we're still accountable for all of the sort of things that consume that space. Depending on your private cloud offering, you can, in the mid-tier, have mixed responsibility. So hardware, operating system support and maintenance can be provided to you by your hosting provider, or it might be you've bought it, installed it into their data center, or it might be fully supported by them. But again, we still have to look after the applications, we're still accountable for the licenses and the user base. A virtual private cloud, well, again, the actual application is pushed further and further down into this shared responsibility model, but users are still down to us as a business. And in the public cloud, to be honest, we get very, very little say about anything. The only thing that we care about are the privileged user access and business users, and that is pretty much it. So that is the equivalent of software as a service, and you get what you get given. Now, cloud and tenancy always is a confusing set of terminology. So I decided to do, there's a couple of hierarchies that will help you visualize what we're talking about. So if you think about in a public cloud, AWS, Azure, Office 365, Google, G Cloud, you have a single tenancy and you have a multiple tenancy. Single tenancy means that all of the resources are allocated to you, and I'll come on to what the differences are a little bit later. Infrastructure as a service, virtual private cloud. Platform as a service, software as a service. Your data is not mixed with anybody else's data. You then have multi-tenancy. Again, you can have multi-tenancy infrastructure as a service, multi-tenancy platform as a service, and multi-tenancy software as a service. You need to consider which of those options is appropriate to you. In the event of compromise, where does the data go and what is the option? If your data is in a database and it's alongside somebody else's data and that database gets compromised, what's the impact on your organization? And then private tenancy by its very nature is a single tenancy. It's yours. But again, you can still have infrastructure as a service, you can still have platform as a service, and you can still have software as a service within your own private data center. Slightly different way of looking at it. Public cloud infrastructure as a service has two flavors, virtual private and a public. Platform as a service, single tenancy, multi-tenancy, and software as a service, single tenancy, multi-tenancy. I put these in because it helps your thought processes. But again, private cloud, infrastructure, platform, software as a service, all have single tenancy in the private cloud. So let's take a look at what we mean by the tenancies and how they compare against each other. So on the left, we have single tenancy. Single tenancy, the only thing that is Shared is the service layer. The service layer is effectively the hypervisor. It's the orchestration layer that spins up your machines, spins up your microservices, and allows you to sort of do what it is you need to do. Now, whether it's single tenancy or multi-tenancy, it is a shared service layer and is an area of attack and an area of concern. Your network on a single tenancy is not shared. It tends to be a private network once you get past the service layer. You can do pretty much what you like to it. It's fully customizable, and you can configure it to your own requirements. Because it's single tenancy, the resources are allocated to you. They stay with you at all times. So you don't get the resource impacts, or you're less likely to get resource impacts. Not always true. Bad neighbors. If you're on a shared infrastructure, a shared web server, and that web server is serving, I don't know, your website, and it is serving another website that might be, I don't know, the Animal Liberation Front, and the Animal Liberation Front decides to get attacked by some hacktivists, your website might get taken down as part of that denial of service. Access management to the console is highly configurable in single tenancy, and your connectivity tends to be dedicated. We look in multi-tenancy. Again, the service layer is shared. Typically, it's across the public network, or at least shared network be in the background. You're not allowed to change what that service does. If you go onto Office 365, you can change the colors of your tenant, you can turn services on and off, but can you fundamentally change what Office 365 does? Absolutely not. Microsoft would get very upset if you tried. Again, resource impacts. Cloud providers use something called thin provisioning. Now, what that actually means is that if you've got a 1 terabyte hard drive and you have 3 customers all needing 500 gig each across 3 machines, what they will do is they will allocate 1.5 terabytes of space on that hard drive, because most of the time a customer doesn't actually need 0.5 terabyte. They just want 0.5 terabyte straight off. However, they'll spot, excuse me, they'll work through and go, oh, that customer's getting a bit close to their 500 gig. I'll move them onto another spindle or another area of the disk. If that happens too quickly, so 3 customers all suddenly go, oh, I need all 500 gig now, physically there isn't enough space behind it, so you can get resource impacts like that. Higher likelihood of bad neighbors, as I've already said. You're sharing the infrastructure with potentially other people that may not have the same security habits that you do. Management consoles tend to be public facing, and as with all these things, I would actually recommend, if you are using a multi-tenancy, in fact, or single tenancy, always protect authentication on your management console with multi-factor. And again, your connectivity is often shared, so you could end up with, again, resource contention if it's the same pipe, and you've got a high bandwidth utilization versus your utilization. You could end up being knocked out or knocked off the internet. So let's have a look at our regulators. I would say this is focused on particularly insurance. However, for banking, you can substitute SIS-8 instead of SIS-13. Our regulators across the top are the Data Protection Act, or Data Protection Office, and GDPR, Financial Conduct Authority, the SIS-C, I never can remember what SIS-C actually stands for, regulations, and PCI DSS. The FCA have some fairly good guidance around what is and what isn't accountable and where the applicability is. GDPR, obviously, anything that is personally identifiable. So HR data, marketing information relating to prospects, basic customer information, customer account information. If you're storing credit cards, you have PCI DSS to worry about. Financial information, again, FCA, PRA, and SIS 13 applies. Other types of information, technical policies, and I mean internal policies, commercial contracts, test data, most of the regulators have no real interest in that. So what do we need in place that will ease our transition into the cloud? Well, the first thing we need to consider is that we have reusable capabilities and services that can be consumed by cloud services. So authentication, authorization, security logging and monitoring, service logging and monitoring, management console protection. They're shared services. They're independent of your cloud. So those are the sorts of things you need to get in place to start with. You need to think about how your service delivery operating and recharge model is going to work. If we go back to the original models, at one end of the scale, you owned everything. You were in control of whether the piece of hardware was replaced after 3 years, or, as one of my CIOs used to like to say, we will sweat that asset until it dies, whether you keep it for 5 years or 10 years. And organizations can do that. In the public cloud or even private cloud, you do not get the option. You do not get the option of when they're going to upgrade you. They give you some flexibility, but they don't give you the option because they have a service to provide. And again, one end of the scale is very capital oriented. The other end is very is a consumption model. So it tends to be on the revenue side of the coin. And it, again, whatever works. You need to have the right controls in place to stop spinning up things that are going to be really, really expensive for you and avoid excessive charging. Suddenly a developer decides they want a half a petabyte of storage with 512 8-core CPUs. That's going to cost you a lot of money if they leave it running. You also need to understand the regulatory frameworks. I've tried to list a number of them here. FCA originally had cloud guidance, FG 16/5, which tells you both the technical and the contractual controls that you need to have. The FCA SIS 13 handbook tells you, again, at a higher level, what sort of things need to be in place. EIOPA is a new set of regulations that have been adopted by the FCA for banking and are expected to be adopted into regulation for insurance during 2020, if they haven't already. The Data Protection Act, GDPR regulations, they have guidance as well. PCI DSS, they view cloud computing as third party. So it's third party security assurance to focus on the confidentiality of credit card numbers. So let's have a look at cloud and risks. I'm going to make some sweeping assumptions, otherwise the analysis gets very, very messy. If we are going to buy a SaaS solution, software as a service, we will stipulate that it has to be compliant with any regulatory requirements. I'm going to assume that platform as a service will always require some integration, and that the key supporting services that I've already alluded to are actually in place. So external authentication, SIEM, business logging are already there. I've also looked at how I'm going to rate the cloud adoption or the complexity. So cost, not a lot. 100,000, 500,000, 500,000 to a million, greater than a million. These are based on a small to medium-sized organization. 6 months, 6 to 9 months, 9 to 12 months, greater than 12 months in elapsed time. How much effort? Months 3 to 6, 6 to 9, greater than 9, and then how much regulator involvement is likely to be required. So let's have a look. Well, the information types, as you can see, clearly impact how complex it is to move into the cloud. If you have a high level of customer information and policy information, suddenly the data protection office is likely to be interested in what you're doing. The DPA, GDPR, FCA, for policy claims quote data, they're interested because if infrastructure as a service or platform as a service goes down, there is a material impact on your customer and your ability to transact. Credit card data, the 16-digit PAN, as it's called, PCI DSS. Actually, it gets easier to comply with PCI DSS as an organization the more control you give to a third party, because it's for them to prove the PCI DSS compliance from an infrastructure perspective, and for you to show that you're handling credit cards correctly from a process perspective. HR data, again, if the HR data is being stored in a software as a service offering by a third party, the actual complexity and impacts are quite reasonably low. Marketing information, technical designs and logs, they might be really important to the customer, sorry, to us as a business. But again, if you think about who wants that data and whether the regulator is going to be interested, pretty much no. So as you can see, the types of information that you're going to be putting into the cloud impact how much you have to consider regulatory involvement. So there are a few things in my mind that we need to consider when you're adopting cloud. If you're looking at a cloud provider, whether it be infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service, what authentication models do you have? Does it support single sign-on? Does it support reduced sign-on? If it does support single sign-on, does it integrate with your single sign-on provider? Are you able to protect it with multi-factor authentication or any other type of authentication approach? What level of authorization models are supported within that service? I've used a number of services where basically you have 2 levels of authorization. You either have administrator or you have user, and that's it. A certain collaboration platform is very, very much like that. Now that's appropriate for a collaboration platform, but is that appropriate in a financial management system or a credit card system, or where you want to be able to track your workflows and ensure segregation of duties? Absolutely not. So you need to dig into what authorization models are actually available to you and how are they implemented. Where does the authorization come from? Is it internal to the application? Is it external to the application? Is it via assertions from from outside? Can the service that you're consuming integrate into the security logging? And if it can it actually give you the level of granularity in the records that you need? So for instance, if an administrator logs in and elevates somebody else's privileges and then logs out and then logs into that account and does something and then logs out again and then logs in again as the administrator and puts the privileges back down, do you have the granularity of audit logs to actually show that? Something that this next one is something that a lot of people make some very, very poor assumptions over. Disaster recovery and service continuity. Now, disaster recovery is about if that cloud service goes down, how can we carry on? How can we bring it back up? Now, cloud services, by their very nature, are highly resilient. They have multiple jurisdictions. They move around. The cloud workload can move around. So the actual likelihood of going into disaster recovery is pretty low. However, disaster recovery is not just about infrastructure. It's about the data. How do you back up your data? If somebody goes in and actually deletes all of your data or corrupts all of your data, is there a backup? These are things you need to consider. Service continuity as well. Is your data, is your service going to move around, and is the application written in a way that supports service continuity? The next one, cryptographic encryption. Is it capable? Where are the keys? Where's your encryption data going to be held? Is the encryption keys held next to the data that you're protecting? Because if it is, then your support and you get a compromise of the service layer, they can gain access to both your cryptographic material and the keys, and therefore they can get access to your data. Geographies. We are part of the EU for the moment, and we have to be very clear on where our data is being held and whether it could get impacted by a foreign power, or could it actually get impacted by legal regulatory impacts in another jurisdiction. So for instance, if you started hosting your data in China, could the Chinese secret police go in and actually impound the server that your data is running on? The other thing that you need to consider, subcontractors, supply chain. A lot of software as a service vendors now do not actually host their own software as a service. They are a wrapper around the application part of the stack. They subcontract the hosting element to the likes of Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. The other elements that we need to look at, contractual. Cloud service agreements. Can we go in and audit? Will a service provider give you any right to audit to prove that they are going to abide by your security requirements? With the large providers, the likes of Amazon, Google, and Azure, Microsoft, No, they absolutely won't. So you need to consider, how do you do security validation? How do you do penetration testing? How do you do all of the stuff that was in your gift previously? And finally, and this is in every piece of guidance that I put up on a previous slide, how the hell do you get out of the agreement when it ends? And what is the cost? FCA guidance, EIOPA guidance, DP guidance all say when you go into an agreement, you need to consider your exit strategy before you actually sign the deal. So let's look at, some of my recommendations on the journey. Well, I've talked about this before, but you need to identify and agree and get funded a common baseline set of controls for all cloud offerings and how and get them implemented. Identify and agree specific controls for common combinations of regulatory requirements and the service offerings. So do the analysis up front. Engage all the vendors as you need to and explore the contractual and assurance control requirements. Repeatable processes. Look at your current on-premise security services and look at what they can offer you as you move into a cloud. A lot of on-premise services have actually moved into hybrid cloud, full cloud, leveraging the existing relationships with your security service providers will help the journey. It will cost you money. They do not usually include cloud licenses in the cost of your on-premise offering because, of course, they need to make money themselves. Cloudify, there's a word for the day. You need to review your security policies, your standards, your procurement approach, your contractual requirements and architectural patterns to adopt a shared accountability model. The standard way of doing things where everything was on-prem doesn't work anymore. So you need to go back and actually review all of your artifacts and go, how will we apply this in a pure cloud or a hybrid fashion? And finally, my final thoughts of the day. There is no cloud. It's just somebody else's computer. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll open up for questions. So there's a couple of options. You can either type your question into the chat box, or you can just come off mute and shout your question out. So it's up to you, really. So if anyone's got any questions, then take it away.
You'll have to read them out, Tash, because I can't see the chat box.
There's none just yet. Nope, no questions for anyone. So we've not got a question, but a comment, Richard. So yep. I really appreciate the presentation. Very informative. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We do have a question that's come through. Where is the availability domain located?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, so whoever asked the question, would you be able to just give us a bit more detail? You can type it again into the chat box. If anyone else has got one, just here we go. The region where the data center is located.
Okay. So if you actually talk to all of each of your service providers, they will normally tell you where the availability zones are and where your data centers are located. They don't always give you the exact address, i.e. they won't even tell you that it's, I don't know, third building on the left in Docklands, but they will say, we have a data center located in Manchester, or we've got one in London and it's in this region of London. We've got one in Frankfurt. We've got them in EU, different regions. Often, not always, you can stipulate what regions you are jurisdictionally allowed to operate in and that your data should not go out of. However, one word of warning, I have had experience where a certain large cloud provider did actually lose connectivity to all of their UK-based data centers and flipped over to their American data centers. It was only for a few hours, but from a regulatory point of view, it was a bit of a nightmare.
Okay, thanks for that. Another comment, not a question, but great presentation. Thank you. That's really nice. We do have another question. How much traction have you had with suppliers, vendors, and bring your own key and SaaS?
Oh, software as a service. So, bit of a mixed bag. I will be brutally honest. Suppliers and vendors, depending on the maturity of them in their estate and whether they are a cloud-first organization. Cloud-first organizations tend to have built their offerings from the ground up, and as such have considered things like bring your own key, or third-party managed keys, or that side of things. Where they have sort of migrated into the cloud themselves, the traction of getting bring your own key is not as good. I'm not going to name names because that just wouldn't be fair. So there is an issue. Software as a service needs to mature in this space. Infrastructure service, platform as a service has matured, but yeah, software as a service is very much people have migrated into the cloud from their old on-prem solution and stuck a GUI a WYSI front end on it and not actually considered those elements of it. And often it's on shared resources at the back end as well.
Okay, thank you very much. We haven't had any more questions come through on the chat at the moment. I'll just give another opportunity if anyone does want to come off mute or speak up and ask on the call. We've got a couple more comments coming through on the chat, so I'll just read those out. So in answer, just a response to your previous answer, Richard, they've just said thank you. We've had similar experience. It's getting more and more traction each week, though.
Yes, definitely.
And then another question, is private cloud more expensive than public cloud?
Oh, now that is one that the cloud adopters philosophical debate. I'm going to go with it depends. Here's that for a politician's answer. Public cloud is inherently cheaper because of the shared nature of all the resources. So private cloud, you have dedicated resources, you have dedicated everything. So by its very nature, you're owning the car. But like a car versus a taxi, if you are sharing the resources, you get less control and you get less ability to do things the way that you want to. And if you want to drive 5,000 miles, you wouldn't do it in a taxi. You would buy yourself a car. So again, it depends on what workloads you're putting into it. So that is the best answer I can give. Is really, it does depend on the workloads. It does depend on your security requirements as well, because you can secure public cloud and you can secure public shared resources, but it can get very expensive very quickly.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Any more questions? Okay, we don't have any more. We don't have any new questions on the chat.
Okay.
So Richard, thank you very much for that. And I think we'll wrap it up there. So thank you everyone for attending as well.
Yep,